In the sun-baked, desolate outlands lived Kovu and Vitani. Life was hard. Food was scarce, and every sunrise brought the same dusty, grim reality. They were young lions, barely old enough to hunt on their own, but they carried a weight much heavier than their lean frame suggested, the weight of hatred. Hatred for the Pride Lands, a place they'd never seen but had been taught to despise. From their earliest days, the elders of the Outlands had filled their ears with tales of Simba, the king of the Pride Lands. Tales of injustice, greed, and cruelty. They were told that Simba had unjustly banished Scar, their beloved leader, and stolen their rightful place in the circle of life. Kovu and Vitani grew up believing that the Pride Lands were a paradise built on lies and stolen resources, and that Simba was a tyrant. Vitani, with her sharp eyes and even sharper tongue, was always the most vocal in her disdain. She yearned for the day they would reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Kovu, quieter and more thoughtful, still shared the same burning resentment, though he kept his feelings more guarded. He dreamt of a day where the Outlands would prosper like the Pride Lands, but he wondered if violence was the only way. Their lives revolved around survival and training. The older lions, hardened by years of living in the harsh Outlands, drilled them relentlessly. They were taught to fight, to hunt, and most importantly, to hate. Every lesson, every drill, was infused with the same message: the Pride Lands were the enemy. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Zira, the fierce and unwavering leader of the Outlanders, summoned Kovu and Vitani. Her eyes, burning with a fanatical intensity, held them captive. "The time has come," she growled, her voice raspy with age and anger. "You two will finally serve the Outlands by infiltrating the Pride Lands." Kovu and Vitani exchanged a nervous glance. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for their entire lives. They were finally going to face the enemy. "Your mission is simple," Zira continued, her voice low and menacing. "Observe Simba and the Lion Guard. Learn their weaknesses, their routines, their strengths. Gather any information that can help us reclaim our rightful place." With a final, chilling glare, she dismissed them. Kovu and Vitani knew that failure was not an option. Their lives and the future of the Outlands depended on their success. Little did they know, their journey into the Pride Lands would not only test their skills, but also their deeply ingrained beliefs. The Pride Lands held more than just an enemy. It held a truth that could shatter everything they thought they knew. The weight of Zira's words settled upon Kovu and Vitani as they retreated from her presence. Infiltration of the Pride Lands was more than just a mission. It was the culmination of years of indoctrination, a twisted legacy passed down through generations of Outlanders. To understand their mission, one had to understand the story of Scar. Flashback begins. A younger Zira, her eyes already blazing with ambition, stood before Scar, the former ruler of the Pride Lands. Scar, with his dark mane and calculating gaze, was a figure of immense power and charisma, even in exile. He paced restlessly, his frustration palpable. "Simba has taken everything from me," Scar growled, his voice laced with bitterness. "The throne, the respect of the pride, everything." Zira, ever loyal, knelt before him. "What is your will, my liege? How can we help you reclaim what is rightfully yours?" Scar stopped pacing and fixed his gaze on Zira. "I have a plan," he said, a sinister smile creeping across his face. "A plan that will ensure Simba's downfall and the return of my reign." He revealed his scheme: to train a young lion, one completely loyal to him, to infiltrate Simba's pride and eventually usurp the throne. This lion would be Kovu. Scar saw something special in the young Kovu, an innocence that could be molded into unwavering loyalty. He believed that Kovu, raised on hatred and resentment, will be the perfect weapon against Simba. Zira embraced the plan wholeheartedly. She vowed to raise Kovu as Scar's heir, instilling in him the same burning desire for revenge. She would ensure that Kovu was strong, ruthless, and utterly devoted to Scar's cause. Flashback ends. The memory of these stories, these promises, fueled Kovu and Vitani's purpose. Scar's plan had become their destiny. They believed they were carrying out his will, restoring balance to the circle of life. As they prepared to leave the Outlands, Vitani turned to Kovu, her eyes filled with determination. "We won't fail Scar," she said, her voice firm. "We will make him proud." Kovu nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew the dangers that lay ahead, but he was ready. He was ready to face Simba, to gather the information Zira needed, and to help the Outlands reclaim their rightful place. But a small part of him, a part he tried to ignore, wondered if everything he had been taught was true. He wondered if Simba was really the tyrant they had been led to believe. These doubts, however, were quickly suppressed by the weight of his upbringing and the unwavering loyalty he felt towards Scar's memory and Zira's leadership. The journey to the Pride Lands was long and arduous. Kovu and Vitani traveled under the cover of darkness, avoiding the main paths and sticking to the shadows. The landscape slowly transformed, the barren wasteland of the Outlands giving way to sparse vegetation, then to rolling hills, and finally, lush grasslands. The air grew warmer, and the scent of fresh water filled their nostrils. As they approached the border of the Pride Lands, Kovu felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. This was it. There was no turning back. He glanced at Vitani, her face a mask of determination. She seemed unfazed by the prospect of facing the enemy. "Remember the plan?" Kovu whispered, his voice barely audible. "Stay hidden, observe, and report back." Vitani nodded. "And if the opportunity presents itself," she added, her eyes gleaming, "we strike." They crossed the border cautiously, their senses on high alert. Every rustle of leaves, every chirp of a bird, sent a jolt of adrenaline through their veins. They moved like shadows, blending into the undergrowth, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Their first task was to find a suitable vantage point, a place where they could observe the Pride Lands without being detected. They eventually found a rocky outcrop overlooking a watering hole, a bustling hub of activity for the Pride Lands inhabitants. From their hidden perch, they watched as zebras, giraffes, and gazelles gathered to drink, their movements graceful and unhurried. Birds of all colors flitted through the air, their songs filling the air with a symphony of life. It was a stark contrast to the desolate silence of the Outlands. "It's different than I imagined," Kovu admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Vitani frowned. "Don't let your guard down," she warned. "This is still enemy territory. Remember what they did to Scar." Kovu nodded, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. He pulled out a piece of charred wood and began to sketch a rough map of the area, noting the locations of key landmarks and potential threats. Vitani, meanwhile, kept watch, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. Days turned into nights as Kovu and Vitani continued their surveillance. They observed Simba, the Lion Guard, and the other members of the Pride, meticulously documenting their routines and habits. They were gathering information, just as Zira had instructed. But with each passing day, the image of the Pride Lands they had been taught to hate began to crumble, replaced by a more complex and unsettling reality. The mission had begun, but the true challenge was only just starting. From their rocky vantage point, the contrast between the Pride Lands and the Outlands became increasingly stark. In the Outlands, every meal was a struggle, every drop of water a precious commodity. Here, the animals seemed to live in abundance, with food and water readily available. It was difficult to reconcile this image with the stories they had been told of Simba's greed and tyranny. One afternoon, as the sun beat down on the Pride Lands, Kovu and Vitani witnessed a scene that further challenged their preconceived notions. A small group of jackals attempted to ambush a herd of gazelles at the watering hole. The gazelles scattered in panic, but one young fawn became separated from its mother and was cornered by the jackals. Before Kovu or Vitani could react, a powerful roar echoed across the plains. Kion, Simba's son and leader of the Lion Guard, charged into the fray, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. With a few well-aimed swipes, he drove the jackals away, sending them scurrying back into the shadows. Kion then gently nudged the frightened fawn back towards its mother, ensuring their reunion. The gazelle nuzzled her baby affectionately, expressing her gratitude to the lion guard. Kion simply nodded, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "Did you see that?" Kovu whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "He saved that fawn." Vitani remained silent for a moment, her eyes narrowed. "It's a trick," she said finally, her voice laced with suspicion. "They're trying to lure us into a false sense of security." Kovu wasn't so sure. He had seen the genuine concern in Kion's eyes, the unwavering commitment to protecting the innocent. It was difficult to believe that it was all an act. Later that day, they observed Simba himself patrolling the Pride Lands, his gaze watchful and protective. He stopped to greet a group of meerkats, sharing a few words and a friendly nuzzle. He helped a young elephant calf cross a muddy river, ensuring its safety. These acts of kindness, these displays of compassion, were a far cry from the image of the ruthless tyrant they had been led to believe. Kovu began to wonder if everything he had been taught about Simba and the Pride Lands was a lie. The abundance, the peace, the acts of kindness, it was all so different from the harsh reality of the Outlands. The mission was to gather information, but the information was changing him. He just couldn't understand how a tyrant could do all of this. Kovu continued to watch Simba, trying to reconcile the image of the compassionate leader with a monstrous tyrant he had been taught to fear. He saw Simba mediating disputes between animals, ensuring that everyone had access to resources, and working tirelessly to maintain the delicate balance of the Pride Lands. One day, Kovu witnessed Simba interacting with his daughter, Kiera. He watched as Simba patiently taught her about the responsibilities of being a future queen, emphasizing the importance of fairness, compassion, and respect for all living creatures. The bond between father and daughter was evident, a bond built on love and trust. "He seems different when he's with her," Kovu murmured, his voice barely audible. Vitani scoffed. "Don't be fooled by appearances," she said, her voice sharp. "He's just putting on a show." "But what if it's not a show?" Kovu countered, his voice tinged with doubt. "What if he's genuinely trying to be a good leader?" Vitani glared at him. "You're starting to sound like a traitor," she snapped. "Have you forgotten what Scar told us? Have you forgotten what they did to our family?" Kovu flinched at her words. He hadn't forgotten. He remembered the stories of Scar's exile, the hardships faced by the Outlanders, the constant struggle for survival. But he also couldn't deny what he was seeing with his own eyes. Simba was not the monster he had expected. He decided to observe Simba even more closely to try and understand the man behind the legend. He watched as Simba dealt with poachers who threatened the Pride Land's wildlife, showing mercy even to those who sought to harm his kingdom. He saw Simba working alongside the other members of the Pride, sharing the burdens of leadership and celebrating their collective achievements. With each passing day, Kovu's doubts grew stronger. He began to question everything he had been taught, everything he had believed. He realized that the truth was far more complex than he had ever imagined. Simba wasn't a tyrant. He was, in fact, a protector, a guardian of the Pride Lands. He wasn't perfect, but he tried his best to ensure the safety and well-being of all those under his care. And the Lion Guard was always there to help when Simba couldn't. This made him start to question whether or not Simba was truly a tyrant, as he was always told. This made him think, was Simba actually trying to be a good king? The Lion Guard, led by Kion, also became a subject of intense observation. Kovu watched them respond to various crises, extinguishing brush fires, rescuing animals trapped in precarious situations, and mediating conflicts between different species. He saw their unwavering dedication to protecting the Pride Lands and its inhabitants. One particular incident stood out. A flash flood threatened to wash away a group of baby meerkats. The Lion Guard, without hesitation, risked their own lives to save the tiny creatures, forming a living dam to divert the floodwaters. Kovu was struck by their bravery and selflessness. "They didn't even think twice," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "They just jumped right in." Vitani remained unconvinced. "It's still a trap," she insisted. They're trying to win our trust. But why? Kovu asked, his brow furrowed. What would they gain by winning our trust? Vitani didn't have an answer. She simply repeated her mantra. They're the enemy. Don't forget that. Despite Vitani's skepticism, Kovu couldn't shake the feeling that the Lion Guard was genuinely good. He saw their unwavering commitment to justice, their compassion for all living creatures, and their willingness to sacrifice themselves for the greater good. He also noticed the respect and admiration the other animals had for the Lion Guard. They were seen as heroes, protectors, and symbols of hope. It was clear that the Lion Guard was not feared, but loved and respected. Kovu started to wonder if the Outlanders had been wrong about the Pride Lands all along. Maybe Simba wasn't a tyrant, and maybe the Lion Guard wasn't a tool of oppression. Maybe, just maybe, they were actually trying to create a better world. The more he observed the Lion Guard, the more he questioned his own beliefs. He was torn between his loyalty to the Outlands and his growing respect for the Pride Lands. He didn't know what to believe anymore. He felt like he was standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. He needed to decide soon, as his indecision was starting to create tension between him and Vitani. One sweltering afternoon, while Kovu and Vitani were observing the Lion Guard, a wildfire erupted in the distance, fueled by dry grass and strong winds. The fire quickly spread, threatening a nearby herd of wildebeest. The Lion Guard immediately sprang into action, racing towards the blaze. Kovu and Vitani watched in awe as they coordinated their efforts, using their unique abilities to combat the flames. Besht, the hippo, used his immense size to create fire breaks, while Fuli, the cheetah, used her speed to evacuate the wildebeest to safety. Ono, the egret, provided aerial reconnaissance, guiding the others through the smoke and flames. Kion, using the roar of the elders, created a powerful gust of wind that helped to contain the fire. As they fought the fire, the Lion Guard noticed Kovu and Vitani observing them from a distance. Kion, ever vigilant, approached them cautiously. You too, he said, his voice firm but not hostile. You should leave. It's not safe here. Vitani bristled at his words, ready to defend herself. But Kovu held her back. We're just watching, Kovu said, his voice surprisingly calm. We didn't mean to cause any trouble. Kion studied them for a moment, his eyes searching their faces. He seemed to sense the conflict brewing within Kovu. Why are you here? Kion asked, his voice softer now. Kovu hesitated, unsure of how to answer. He couldn't tell Kion the truth, that they were spies sent by the Outlanders. But he also couldn't bring himself to lie. We were curious, Kovu stammered. We wanted to see what the Pride Lands were like. Kion nodded slowly, as if accepting his answer, even if he didn't fully believe it. Well, you've seen it, he said. Now please go. Let's do our job. As Kovu and Vitani turned to leave, Kion added, and if you ever need help, don't hesitate to ask. Kovu was taken aback by his words. Help? From the enemy? It was almost too much to comprehend. As they retreated, Kovu couldn't help but wonder if he was making the right choices. He glanced back at Kion one last time before disappearing into the brush, and felt a strange sense of guilt wash over him. Maybe the Pride Lands weren't as bad as he had thought. He was starting to see that the Pride Lands animals had a real sense of camaraderie, working together toward a common goal. It made him question everything. As they moved deeper into the Pride Lands, the seeds of doubt that Kion had planted began to sprout in Kovu's mind. He found himself constantly replaying the events he had witnessed, questioning everything he had ever known. Why would they help us if they were really our enemies? He asked Vitani one evening, as they sat huddled beneath a baobab tree. Why would they risk their lives to save others? Vitani remained silent, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She refused to acknowledge the doubts that were plaguing Kovu. She didn't want to believe that everything they had been taught was a lie. Don't you see, Vitani? Kovu persisted. The Pride Lands aren't what we thought they were. Simba isn't a tyrant. The Lion Guard isn't a tool of oppression. They're just trying to protect their home and their families. Vitani finally turned to face him, her eyes filled with anger. You're being naive, Kovu, she snapped. You're letting them manipulate you. Don't you remember what Scar wanted? Don't you remember our mission? I remember, Kovu said softly. But I also remember seeing Kion risk his life to save those baby meerkats. I remember seeing Simba help that elephant calf cross the river. I remember seeing the lion guard fight that fire to protect the wildebeest. Those aren't the actions of a tyrant, Vitani. Those are the actions of heroes. Vitani stood up, her body trembling with rage. I can't believe you're saying this, she said, her voice shaking. I thought you were stronger than this. I thought you were loyal to Scar. I'm loyal to Scar, Kovu said, standing up to face her. But I'm also loyal to the truth. And the truth is the Pride Lands aren't our enemy. They're just different. Then you're a traitor, Vitani spat, her eyes blazing with fury. You betrayed Scar, you betrayed Zira, and you betrayed the Outlands. Kovu sighed, his heart heavy with sadness. He didn't want to fight with Vitani, but he couldn't deny what he was seeing. He knew that their friendship was on the verge of collapse, but he couldn't bring himself to pretend. The truth was too important. That night, Kovu and Vitani slept separately, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. Kovu tossed and turned, unable to find peace. He knew that he had to make a decision. He had to choose between his loyalty to the Outlands and his growing respect for the Pride Lands. But he didn't know what to do. He felt completely and utterly lost. Everything he thought he knew was a lie. What was he supposed to do? The next day, still reeling from their argument, Kovu decided to explore a different part of the Pride Lands. He wandered away from their usual observation point, drawn by a faint whisper of the wind that seemed to beckon him towards an ancient grove of trees. The grove was unlike anything he had ever seen. The trees were massive, their gnarled branches reaching towards the sky like ancient arms. The air was thick with the scent of moss and damp earth, and a sense of profound peace permeated the grove. As he ventured deeper, he stumbled upon a hidden cave, its entrance concealed by a curtain of vines. Curiosity piqued. He pushed aside the vines and stepped inside. The cave was dimly lit by shafts of sunlight that filtered through cracks in the ceiling. The walls were covered in ancient paintings, depicting scenes from the Pride Lands history. He saw images of lions hunting, playing, and protecting their territory. He saw images of the great kings of the past, their faces etched with wisdom and strength. As he gazed at the paintings, one image caught his eye. It was a depiction of two lions standing side by side, their paws clasped together in a gesture of unity. One lion had a dark mane, like Scar, while the other had a golden mane, like Simba. Beneath the image, he saw an inscription, written in an ancient language he couldn't understand. He spent hours studying the paintings, trying to decipher their meaning. He felt a strange connection to the lions depicted on the walls, as if he were somehow linked to their past. Just as he was about to give up, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "What are you doing here?" It was Rafiki, the wise old baboon who served as the Pride Land shaman. He stood at the entrance to the cave, his eyes filled with curiosity. Kovu hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He didn't want to reveal his true identity, but he also couldn't bring himself to lie to Rafiki. I was just exploring," Kovu stammered. "I found this cave, and I was curious about the paintings." Rafiki nodded slowly, as if accepting his answer. He approached the paintings and began to study them, his brow furrowed in concentration. "These paintings tell a story," Rafiki said, his voice soft. "A story of unity, of betrayal, and of redemption." He pointed to the image of the two lions clasping paws. "These lions were brothers," he explained. "They ruled the Pride Lands together, in peace and harmony. But one brother grew jealous of the other, and he betrayed him, plunging the Pride Lands into darkness." Kovu listened intently, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt like he was on the verge of uncovering a long-lost secret, a secret that could change everything. "And what happened to the brother who was betrayed?" Kovu asked, his voice barely audible. Rafiki smiled sadly. "He was exiled from the Pride Lands," he said, "but he never gave up hope. He always believed that one day the Pride Lands would be restored to its former glory." He then revealed that the exiled lion had descendants, and that Kovu was one of them. This meant that Kovu was related to Simba. Kovu was shocked. Was he really related to the one he was supposed to hate? Kovu reeled from Rafiki's revelation. Related to Simba? It was almost too much to bear. He stumbled out of the cave, his mind racing. He had to find Vitani. He eventually found her near their usual vantage point, her face etched with suspicion and anger. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he had to tell her what he had learned. "Vitani," he said, his voice trembling. "I have to tell you something. Something important." Vitani glared at him. "What is it?" she snapped. "Have you finally decided to betray us completely?" Kovu took a deep breath. "I went to that ancient grove," he said. "I found a cave with old paintings. And I met Rafiki." Vitani's eyes narrowed. "Rafiki? What did he say?" He told me that I'm related to Simba," Kovu blurted out. "That I'm a descendant of an exiled lion who used to rule the Pride Lands." Vitani stared at him in disbelief, then burst into laughter. "You're lying," she said, her voice filled with scorn. "Rafiki is trying to trick you. He's trying to turn you against us." "I'm not lying," Kovu insisted. "I saw the paintings. I heard Rafiki's story. It's true, Vitani. We're not who we thought we were." Vitani shook her head, refusing to believe him. "Even if it's true," she said, her voice hard, "it doesn't change anything. We still have a mission to fulfill. We still have to avenge Scar." "But what if revenge isn't the answer?" Kovu pleaded. "What if we can find a better way? What if we can unite the Outlands and the Pride Lands, just like those lions in the paintings?" "You're dreaming, Kovu," Vitani said, her voice filled with despair. "It will never happen. The Outlanders will never forgive Simba, and Simba will never trust us." "But maybe we can change that," Kovu said, his eyes filled with hope. "Maybe we can show them that we're not their enemies. Maybe we can build a bridge between our two worlds." Vitani looked at him, her expression softening slightly. For a moment, Kovu thought he had gotten through to her. But then, her eyes hardened again. "I can't," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't betray Zira. I can't betray Scar. I can't betray everything I've ever believed in." Kovu sighed, his heart sinking. He knew that he couldn't force Vitani to change her mind. He had to make his own decision, regardless of what she chose to do. He looked out at the Pride Lands, at the lush grasslands, the sparkling rivers, and the diverse array of animals living in harmony. He thought about Simba's kindness, Kion's bravery, and Rafiki's wisdom. He knew, deep down, that he couldn't turn his back on this place. He knew he couldn't continue to harbor hatred and resentment in his heart. He knew he had to choose a different path. But he also knew that choosing this path would mean betraying his family, his friends, and everything he had ever known. The internal conflict was tearing him apart. He didn't know what to do. He longed for the simplicity of his old beliefs, but he couldn't deny the truth that was staring him in the face. He was at war with himself, and he didn't know how to win. He knew he needed to choose soon, as Zira would be expecting a report any day now. What was he going to say? What was he going to do? The next morning dawned with an unsettling stillness. The air was heavy and humid, and a strange silence had fallen over the Pride Lands. Kovu, still grappling with his internal conflict, couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. As he and Vitani were discussing their next move, or lack thereof, they noticed a large cloud of dust rising in the distance. They quickly realized that it was the Outlanders, led by Zira, marching towards the Pride Lands. "They're here," Vitani whispered, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "The moment we've been waiting for." Kovu's heart sank. He knew that Zira's arrival meant war. He couldn't let it happen. He had to stop her, even if it meant betraying everything he had ever known. "We have to warn Simba," Kovu said, his voice filled with urgency. "We have to tell him that Zira is coming." Vitani stared at him in disbelief. "Are you crazy?" she snapped. "We're supposed to be helping Zira. We're supposed to be leading her to Simba." "I can't do that," Kovu said, his voice firm. "I can't let her destroy the Pride Lands. I've seen what Simba is trying to build here. I can't let Zira tear it all down." "Then you're choosing them over us?" Vitani asked, her voice filled with anger. "You're choosing Simba over your own family?" "I'm choosing what's right," Kovu said. "I'm choosing peace over hatred. I'm choosing the future over the past." Vitani shook her head, her eyes filled with sadness. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said. "I thought we were friends. I thought we were family." We are, Kovu said, but that doesn't mean we have to agree on everything. It doesn't mean we have to follow the same path. He knew he couldn't convince Vitani to change her mind. He had to act quickly before it was too late. He turned and ran towards Pride Rock, determined to warn Simba of the impending danger. Vitani watched him go, her heart torn. She wanted to believe in him, but she couldn't betray her loyalty to Zira. She knew she had to make a choice, too. Would she follow Kovu and risk everything she had ever known? Or would she stay true to the Outlanders and help Zira destroy the Pride Lands? She knew she didn't have much time to decide. Zira would be expecting them to help her find Simba. What was she going to do? Who was she going to help? The decision weighed heavily on her heart. This was the moment of truth. Her next actions would determine the fate of the Pride Lands and the Outlands. She knew that whatever she did would have dire consequences. She had to choose wisely. Was she going to follow her heart, or was she going to stay true to what she knew? Only time would tell. Kovu raced towards Pride Rock, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the distant roars of the Outlanders growing closer, and he knew he was running out of time. He had to reach Simba before it was too late. He arrived at Pride Rock, breathless and exhausted. Simba was standing at the edge of the promontory, his gaze fixed on the approaching army. Kion and the Lion Guard stood beside him, ready for battle. "Simba," Kovu shouted, his voice hoarse. "You have to listen to me. Zira is coming. She's leading the Outlanders to attack the Pride Lands." Simba turned to face him, his eyes filled with suspicion. "Who are you?" he growled. "And why should I believe you?" "My name is Kovu," he said, "and I was raised in the Outlands. Zira sent me and Vitani to spy on you, but I've seen the truth. I've seen that you're not a tyrant. I've seen that you're trying to protect your home." Simba studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. He seemed to sense the sincerity in Kovu's voice. "Why are you telling me this?" Simba asked. "Because I can't let her destroy the Pride Lands," Kovu said. "I can't let her bring more hatred and violence into this world." Just then, the Outlanders reached Pride Rock, their roars echoing across the plains. Zira stepped forward, her eyes burning with fury. "Simba," she roared, "I've come to reclaim what is rightfully ours. I've come to avenge Scar." Simba stood his ground, his expression resolute. "This ends here, Zira," he said. "There will be no more bloodshed. There will be no more hatred." Zira lunged at Simba, her claws outstretched. But before she could reach him, Kovu jumped in front of Simba, intercepting the attack. Zira snarled at Kovu, her eyes filled with rage. "What are you doing, Kovu?" she screamed. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I'm on the side of peace," Kovu said, his voice firm. "I'm on the side of what's right." Zira attacked Kovu again, but he dodged her blows and stood his ground. He knew he couldn't defeat her, but he could buy Simba and the Lion Guard some time. As the battle raged, Kovu saw Zira corner Kion, who had been separated from the rest of the Lion Guard. She was about to strike the final blow when Kovu, without hesitation, leaped in front of Kion, taking the brunt of the attack. Kovu collapsed to the ground, wounded but alive. Zira stood over him, ready to finish him off. But before she could, Simba intervened, driving Zira away. Simba knelt beside Kovu, his expression filled with concern. "Why did you do that?" he asked. "Why did you save my son?" "Because it was the right thing to do," Kovu said, his voice weak. "Because I believe in the Pride Lands. I believe in you." Simba looked at Kovu, his eyes filled with gratitude. He knew that Kovu had made a difficult choice, a choice that had put his own life at risk. He also now knew that what Kovu had said was true. Kovu was a changed lion, and had risked his life to save Kion, Simba's son. It was time to trust Kovu and let him into the Pride Lands. The question was, what would happen to Vitani? Vitani watched as Kovu, the lion she had known her entire life, bravely defended the Pride Lands, a place she had been taught to hate. She saw him risk his life to save Kion, a member of the Pride Lands that they were supposed to consider the enemy. Her heart ached with confusion and conflicting emotions. Zira, enraged by Kovu's betrayal, turned her fury towards Vitani. "Why aren't you helping me?" she screamed. "Are you a traitor too?" Vitani hesitated. She looked at Zira, her face contorted with anger and hatred. She looked at the other Outlanders, their eyes filled with the same burning resentment. She then looked at Kovu, lying wounded on the ground, his face etched with pain, but his eyes filled with hope. She knew she had to make a choice. She couldn't continue to live in the shadow of Scar's legacy, consumed by hatred and revenge. She had to choose a different path, a path that led to peace and understanding. Taking a deep breath, Vitani stepped forward, placing herself between Zira and the rest of the Outlanders. "Enough!" she shouted, her voice ringing with newfound conviction. "This has to stop." Zira stared at her in disbelief. "What are you doing, Vitani?" she asked, her voice trembling with rage. "You're defying me?" "I'm choosing peace," Vitani said, her voice firm. "I'm choosing to believe that there's a better way. I'm choosing to forgive." Zira lunged at Vitani, her claws outstretched. But before she could reach her, the other Outlanders stepped in front of Vitani, blocking Zira's path. "We're with Vitani," one of the Outlanders said, his voice filled with determination. "We're tired of fighting. We're tired of hating. We want peace." One by one, the other Outlanders joined them, standing shoulder to shoulder with Vitani, their faces filled with newfound hope. They had finally realized that Zira's path led only to destruction and despair. Zira, now completely alone, stared at the Outlanders in disbelief. Her eyes filled with tears of rage and despair. She had lost everything. Seeing Zira's defeat, Vitani turned to Simba. "We want to join the Pride Lands," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "We want to help you build a better future." Simba looked at Vitani and the other Outlanders, his expression filled with compassion. He knew that they had made a difficult choice, a choice that had required immense courage and strength. He also knew that they deserved a second chance. "Welcome," Simba said, his voice filled with warmth. "Welcome to the Pride Lands." And with that, the Outlanders, led by Vitani, joined the Pride Lands, ushering in an era of peace and unity. The two groups, once enemies, now stood side by side, working together to build a better future for all. Vitani had finally found her place, and the Pride Lands were finally whole. This was what Scar had wanted all along. Or was it? Perhaps Scar had wanted war, and Vitani's choice had ruined his plan. Either way, the Pride Lands were now safe, thanks to Kovu and Vitani. With the battle over and the Outlanders integrated into the Pride Lands, an uneasy peace settled over the two groups. Many of the Pride Landers were still wary of the former Outlanders, unsure if they could truly be trusted. Similarly, some of the former Outlanders struggled to adapt to their new life, missing the familiar harshness and camaraderie of their old home. Despite these challenges, Simba and Vitani worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between the two groups, organizing joint patrols, sharing resources, and encouraging dialogue. They knew that it would take time to build trust, but they were determined to create a unified Pride Lands. However, Zira's shadow still loomed large. Though she was defeated and alone, her hatred continued to fester. She watched from the shadows as the Pride Lands and the Outlanders worked together, her rage growing with each passing day. One evening, as Kovu and Vitani were discussing their progress in uniting the two groups, they were ambushed by Zira. Her eyes were wild with fury, and her claws were bared. "You traitors!" she screamed. "You've ruined everything. You betrayed Scar. You betrayed the Outlands." Kovu stepped in front of Vitani, protecting her from Zira's wrath. "It's over, Zira," he said, his voice firm. "There's no point in fighting anymore. We want peace." "Peace?" Zira scoffed. "There will never be peace. Not as long as Simba lives. Not as long as the Pride Lands exist." She lunged at Kovu, her claws aimed at his throat. But before she could strike, Vitani intervened, knocking Zira off balance. "We won't let you hurt anyone anymore, Zira," Vitani said, her voice filled with determination. "We're not going to let you spread your hatred any further." Zira snarled at them, her eyes filled with pure malice. "You may have won this battle," she said, "but the war is far from over. I will find a way to destroy the Pride Lands, even if it's the last thing I do." With that, she turned and fled, disappearing into the shadows. Kovu and Vitani watched her go, their hearts filled with apprehension. They knew that Zira would never give up and that she would continue to pose a threat to the Pride Lands as long as she was alive. They needed to find a way to stop her, once and for all. But how? They had already tried everything. What was left to do? They knew that they had to be vigilant and protect the Pride Lands from Zira's wrath, but they also knew that they couldn't let her consume their lives with fear and hatred. They had to find a way to move forward, to build a better future, despite the lingering threat of Zira's revenge. It was a difficult balance to strike, but they were determined to try. For the sake of the Pride Lands, and for the sake of their own peace of mind, they had to succeed. The encounter with Zira left Kovu and Vitani shaken, but it also strengthened their resolve. They knew that they had to do everything in their power to protect the Pride Lands from her hatred. They decided that the best way to do this was to reach out to the remaining Outlanders who had not yet embraced the new peace. They traveled to the fringes of the Pride Lands, seeking out the Outlanders who still clung to their old beliefs. They found them living in small, isolated groups, their faces etched with suspicion and resentment. "We know what you're thinking," Kovu said to one group of Outlanders. "We know that you don't trust us. We know that you still believe that Simba is your enemy." "He is our enemy," one of the Outlanders retorted. "He banished Scar. He stole our home. He left us to starve in the Outlands." "We used to believe that too," Vitani said. "But we were wrong. We've seen the truth. Simba is not a tyrant. He's a protector. He cares about all the animals in the Pride Lands, even us." "That's a lie," another Outlander shouted. "He's just trying to trick you into letting your guard down." "It's not a lie," Kovu said. "We've seen it with our own eyes. We've seen Simba help the weak, defend the innocent, and bring peace to the Pride Lands." "And what about Scar?" one of the Outlanders asked. "Are you saying that he was wrong?" "Scar was a great leader," Vitani said, "but he was also consumed by hatred and revenge. He let his anger cloud his judgment. He made mistakes." "But he was our leader," the Outlander insisted. "We were loyal to him." "We were loyal to him too," Kovu said. "But we've come to realize that loyalty doesn't mean blindly following someone, even if they're wrong. Loyalty means doing what's right, even if it's difficult. And what's right is to choose peace, to choose forgiveness, to choose a better future." Kovu and Vitani continued to speak, sharing their experiences and their newfound beliefs. They told the Outlanders about Simba's kindness, Kion's bravery, and Rafiki's wisdom. They told them about the abundance and the harmony of the Pride Lands. Slowly, gradually, the Outlanders began to listen. They saw the sincerity in Kovu and Vitani's eyes. They heard the passion in their voices. They began to question their own beliefs. Maybe you're right," one of the Outlanders said, his voice filled with doubt. "Maybe there is a better way." "There is," Vitani said, her voice filled with hope. "Come with us. See for yourselves. Give Simba a chance. Give the Pride Lands a chance. You won't regret it." And so, one by one, the remaining Outlanders agreed to join the Pride Lands. They laid down their weapons, shed their hatred, and embraced a new life of peace and unity. Kovu and Vitani had succeeded in convincing them of the truth. The Pride Lands were finally whole, and the threat of Zira's revenge seemed a little less daunting. This was all they could do. The rest was up to fate. They had tried their best, and that was all that mattered. The future was uncertain, but they were determined to face it together, united as one. The Pride Lands would be safe. They had to be. Despite their best efforts, Kovu and Vitani knew that Zira was still out there, plotting her revenge. They couldn't rest until she was stopped for good. One day, while patrolling the border of the Pride Lands, Kovu and Vitani spotted Zira near a raging river. The river had flooded due to recent heavy rains, and the current was treacherous. Zira, blinded by her hatred, was attempting to cross the river, seemingly intent on reaching Pride Rock and carrying out her plan to harm Simba. However, she lost her footing and was swept away by the powerful current. Kovu and Vitani watched in horror as Zira struggled to stay afloat, her roars of anger turning into cries for help. Despite everything she had done, despite all the pain and suffering she had caused, Kovu couldn't let her die. "We have to save her," Kovu shouted, diving into the raging river without hesitation. Vitani, though still harboring resentment towards Zira, couldn't let Kovu face the danger alone. She followed him into the water, battling against the powerful current. Together, Kovu and Vitani managed to reach Zira, who was clinging to a log, exhausted and terrified. They pulled her towards the shore, struggling against the relentless current. As they reached the safety of the riverbank, Zira looked at Kovu and Vitani, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and confusion. She couldn't understand why they had saved her, after everything she had done to them. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why did you save me?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Kovu said, his voice filled with compassion. "We may have been enemies, but we're all part of the circle of life. We can't let hatred consume us." Zira looked at Kovu and Vitani, her expression softening slightly. For the first time in her life, she saw the possibility of a different path, a path that led to forgiveness and understanding. In that moment, Zira realized the futility of her hatred and the destructive power of revenge. She finally understood that Scar's legacy had only brought pain and suffering to everyone involved. With a sigh of resignation, Zira closed her eyes and surrendered to her fate. She had finally let go of her hatred, and in doing so, she had found peace. With Zira gone, the Pride lands were finally free from the shadow of the past. Kovu and Vitani had succeeded in uniting the two groups, bringing peace and harmony to the land. They had proven that even the deepest hatred can be overcome by compassion and understanding. They had both fully integrated into the Pride lands. As the sun set over the Pride lands, casting a warm glow over the reunited Pride, Kovu and Vitani stood side by side, their hearts filled with hope for the future. They knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but they were determined to face it together, united as one. The Pride lands were safe, and the circle of life was complete. It was all over. They had won.